Hi everyone, welcome to this channel. Today, we're going to dive deep into something that's often puzzling but rarely explained in detail. Have you ever felt like you're being watched, even when you're alone? In this episode, we're going to uncover one of the creepiest stories you've never heard before. Dylan Carter was the kind of man who found peace in solitude. At 35, with sun-worn skin and eyes that had seen too much of life too early, he had long traded the noise of Sydney for the stillness of rural Australia. A former marine biologist turned fishing guide, he now spent his days surrounded by silence, water, and the occasional tourist. People said Dylan had a past, one that clung to him like a shadow at dusk, but he never spoke of it. The Lake Willowmere, became his escape. Hidden among dense gum trees and weathered rock formations, it was rarely disturbed by outsiders. The locals avoided it. Some whispered of strange echoes at night or figures that watched from the mist. Dylan never cared for stories. He trusted his gut and his gear, and that was enough. Every morning, Dylan would rise before the sun, prepare his old aluminum boat, and head out to the center of Willowmere. The water was always still, like a sheet of polished stone, reflecting back the twisted branches overhead. The deeper parts of the lake were unnaturally cold, even in summer. He never questioned it. He simply cast his line, watched the ripples fade, and allowed the quiet to swallow his thoughts. But lately, the lake had felt different. The birds that used to greet him with morning songs had gone silent. The wind seemed to carry whispers, not breezes. And the fish, once plentiful and eager, had grown scarce, as if something deeper, older, had claimed the lake for itself. On a fog-laced morning in early autumn, Dylan reeled in his first catch in days. But as the fish breached the surface, he froze. Its body was mangled, flesh torn as if something had chewed through it with jagged teeth. Yet there were no natural predators in the lake that could inflict such damage. He examined it silently, heart pounding beneath his flannel shirt. The gills were ripped open, and the eyes, milky and wide, seemed to stare at something behind him. He laughed nervously to himself, tossed the fish back, and tried to shake it off. But deep down, a cold knot of unease began to twist in his gut. The lake, his sanctuary, was no longer familiar. Over the next few days, Dylan noticed more things that didn't sit right. At night, he heard splashes that came too close to shore, even when he wasn't near the water. His dog, Brutus, a big, fearless shepherd, began refusing to go near the lake. One morning, he found deep claw-like marks on the side of his boat, gouged into the metal as if by something trying to climb aboard. He couldn't explain it. There were no large animals around, no bears or crocs this far south. The marks were wide-set, unnatural. Still, Dylan told himself it was a prank. Teenagers, maybe. He didn't want to believe in ghosts or creatures lurking below. But in the quiet moments before sleep, when the wind outside mimicked breathing, he began to wonder if something ancient had awakened beneath Willowmere. One rainy afternoon, while searching through his grandfather's old storage shed on the property near the lake, Dylan stumbled upon a water-damaged journal. The leather cover was cracked, and inside, the pages held brittle memories, sketches of the lake, notes on weather, and strange entries about voices under the surface and eyes in the fog. The last dated entry chilled him to the bone. It spoke of a legend older than the town itself, a creature that claimed the lake every few decades, luring the lonely with silence and drowning them in madness. Dylan remembered that his grandfather had vanished years ago, his body never found. Everyone said he simply walked into the woods one day and never came back. But now, with this journal in hand, Dylan realized that maybe his grandfather never left. Maybe something in Willowmere had taken him, and now, it was Dylan's turn to be watched. That night, the wind refused to rest. It howled through the trees like a wounded animal, and the moon flickered behind thick clouds, casting shifting shadows across Dylan's cabin. He lit a fire to chase the chill, but the flames only seemed to highlight the stillness pressing in from outside. As the hour grew late, Dylan sat with the journal open on his lap, rereading the entries. He didn't hear the first knock. It was faint, like a pebble dropped against glass. Then it came again, sharper this time, tapping against the window in a slow, deliberate rhythm. When he turned to look, there was nothing there. Only the fog thickening at the tree line, creeping forward like a living thing. Then came the whisper, so soft he thought it might be his own thoughts. But it repeated, clearer now, as if carried on the mist, a name. His name. Spoken with a breath that didn't belong to any living thing. At dawn, Dylan realized Brutus was missing. The dog had been restless the night before, growling at the lake from inside the cabin. Now his leash lay coiled beside the porch, untouched. Dylan searched the woods, his boots sinking into damp moss, calling out into the silence. No paw prints, no broken branches. It was as if Brutus had been lifted from the earth itself. The woods had never felt so wrong. Birds no longer sang, and even the insects seemed to hold their breath. When Dylan returned to the lake's edge, he found a single print in the mud, not from Brutus, nor from any animal he knew. It was elongated, almost human, but with too many toes. At the edge of the print, something shimmered briefly in the water, just beneath the surface, before vanishing into the depths. Determined to prove to himself that he wasn't losing his mind, Dylan decided to inspect the old dock that jutted out into Willowmere. It had always creaked underfoot, but now it groaned as if under pressure from below. As he stepped carefully to the end, he noticed something caught between the planks. Reaching down, he pulled out a bundle of fabric, old, rotted clothing wrapped tightly around something solid. Inside, beneath layers of algae and rot, he uncovered a small wooden totem, carved with jagged, primitive symbols. It reeked of damp earth and decay, and as soon as he touched it, the air grew colder. That night, he saw lights beneath the water. Not reflections. Not fish. Actual lights, flickering like lanterns being carried slowly through the lakebed forest. As if the lake sensed his defiance, a violent storm rolled in without warning. The wind snapped branches like bones, and the rain fell sideways, hammering the cabin's roof like fists. Dylan tried to leave, to drive into town. But the road was gone. Where the path had once been, there was now only water. The lake had risen, swallowing the shoreline and turning the land into a flooded mire. It had isolated him. The power died shortly after, plunging the cabin into darkness. In the distance, through the sheets of rain, he saw a figure standing on the dock. Tall. Motionless. Watching. But when lightning split the sky, it was gone. Or perhaps it had never been there, only the lake reminding him that he was no longer a guest, but a prisoner. That night, Dylan dreamt of drowning. Not the kind of drowning where lungs fight for air, but a slow, accepting descent into blackness. In his dream, something coiled around his ankles, cold and wet, pulling him deeper into water that never ended. He awoke gasping, drenched in sweat, only to realize his bed was soaked, not from perspiration, but from lake water. His feet were muddy. He had no memory of sleepwalking, yet there were wet footprints across the cabin floor, leading from his bed to the front door, and back. On the wall above his bed, something had been scratched in with a nail or a claw. He couldn't read the full message, half of it had been wiped away, but one word stood out clearly: return. As if something from the lake had come for what once belonged to it. Dylan knew, then, that the whispers were not merely voices. They were invitations. Or perhaps warnings. And the lake had only just begun its hunt. The next morning brought no peace. Dylan awoke to find dozens of dead fish washed ashore, each with their eyes missing, their mouths frozen mid-scream. But more disturbing than the fish were the footprints around the cabin. They weren't his. Barefoot, damp, and pressed deep into the soft earth, they circled the structure in loops, some prints leading to the water, others to his porch. One trail stopped just outside his bedroom window. That night, as he searched through the old journal again, he discovered a final page tucked between the back cover. It was a drawing, rough and furious. 4 stick-like figures with hollow circles for eyes, all pointing toward a shape in the center that resembled the totem he'd found. Underneath it were scratched words, "They return when the blood remembers." Dylan didn't understand. But his blood had started to feel colder in his veins, as if something inside him had already begun to remember. After a sleepless night filled with phantom creaks and flickering shadows, Dylan decided to inspect beneath the cabin. The crawl space had always been tight, but now it felt like a tunnel leading somewhere else entirely. As he crouched under the floorboards with a flashlight, he saw something that didn't belong, a patch of disturbed soil. He dug with his bare hands until his fingers struck wood. A crate, sealed shut with rusty nails. Inside were objects wrapped in wet linen, children's shoes, a cracked porcelain doll, and a leather-bound book rotted from age. But it was the scent that unnerved him most. It smelled like the lake. As he examined the book, the flashlight flickered and died. In the darkness, Dylan heard breathing. Close. Behind him. He scrambled out, cutting his arms and legs, but he didn't stop until he was back inside, locking the door behind him. The crate remained below, untouched, waiting. With power still out, Dylan tried using an old battery-powered radio for news. At first, only static filled the air. Then, deep within the noise, came a voice. Not broadcasted, not clear. Just, present. It didn't speak in full sentences, only fragmented thoughts, names, and a low chant that repeated every few seconds. Then, unmistakably, came the name of his dog. Brutus. Repeated 3 times, then silence. The room grew unbearably cold, and the hairs on his neck stood upright. When he turned, he saw wet footprints again, this time leading from the door to the table, where the totem now stood, upright, even though he hadn't touched it since that first day. Something was using the radio not just to speak, but to reach. Hoping for escape, Dylan ventured out again. But now the entire trail was submerged. What was once a narrow path through the forest had become a channel of black water, stretching endlessly between trees that looked less like trees and more like silent sentinels. He tried wading through it, but the current below the surface tugged at his legs, stronger than any natural stream. Halfway through, something brushed against his thigh. He turned to find nothing, but felt it again. A hand, slick and skeletal, gripping his ankle. He panicked and struggled back to shore, collapsing breathless in the mud. Looking into the water, he saw not his reflection, but faces. Pale, submerged, unmoving, just under the surface, watching. The island no longer wanted him gone. It wanted him changed. That night, Dylan prepared to burn the totem. He set it on the fireplace and struck a match. But the flame refused to touch it, as if the object repelled fire. The moment the match fell near it, the wind howled violently and extinguished the flame. A sudden pain seared across his forearm. Looking down, he saw a fresh symbol, identical to one carved into the totem, now burned into his skin as though branded. His blood had remembered. The lake had chosen. And the island, long forgotten by maps and men, had found a new soul to hold. Dylan fell to the floor, clutching his arm, as the cabin's walls began to groan. The floorboards pulsed like a heartbeat. Outside, the lake rose silently, reclaiming the land inch by inch. And in that final moment of the night, as the wind fell still, a new whisper came, not from the forest, nor the water, but from within his own mind. The lake had never been empty. It had only been waiting. That was our story for tonight. Do you think it's just an ordinary tale, or is there something more to it? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the next stories. See you, if you still dare to watch next time.